Today we are going to talk about value. Value is one of the art elements that we will be discussing. So today, whenever we label where we're putting value, we're going to draw it first, just like regular words. So I like to write out the word value, and while I do this, I'll discuss what value actually is. When you think of value, you usually think about money or how much something is worth. However, when we talk about value in art, it actually is talking about the lights and the darks on something. Sometimes we also hear it be called shading. And what is the purpose of shading? I'll pause right there so you can think about it. Shading is the way that something will look three-dimensional because there's things that make it not look flat anymore, right? You put the darks and the shadows and the bright highlights on it, and it makes it look like it's three-dimensional. So whenever I make block letters, I can get rid of, this is what I call my stick figure letter in the middle, and now it's much prettier, right? So whenever you draw this, I want you to do a little bit of value on your block letters to make it look like, at a glance, it has some shading so you can remember what value is. And then over on this side, we're going to write a very concise or short little definition, as short as I can make it. We're going to write darks and lights, also known as shading. Inside of our little foldable, we're going to write an example. Usually, when my students make an example of value, a lot of teachers will start with circles. However, I know most of my students get pretty frustrated with circles. So today we're going to make apples, because your apple can be as wonky as you want and it still looks good like an apple. So if you start off really light, right in the center, well, we're not going to make it too big. I'd say about the size of your thumbnail, you're going to do a little apple shape. I erase my little line there. You see how light it is, so I could erase it very easily. Now, my little thumbnail-sized apple shape, your apple shape might be more squished. It might be a little taller, but it doesn't matter because all apples are different. Whenever I start putting value on things, I have to think about a lot of stuff, like, where's the light coming from? Where does the shadow go? So every time you think about value, you'll want to think about your light source. So if the light source is hitting from this side, I'm going to just write light source over here so you can remember this is where the light is coming from. It doesn't matter what the light is, that's where it's coming from. On this side, I like to put little reminders on here. So if I have my light source hitting on this side up top, then where's my shadow going to go? Look at this. If I follow this angle, it's going to go this direction over here because the apple is blocking the light from getting to the ground over here. So that's where my shadow is going to go. Now, in order to draw a cast shadow on the ground, because that's what it's called, it's cast upon the ground. We threw it down there. So in order to show exactly where it's going to go, this is a good idea. You can put little dotted lines on either side of your apple, and your cast shadow is going to touch on wherever it touches the ground. It's going to touch here and here, and it's going to look kind of like the apple, but it's going to be stretched out, right? And it can't go any further than this, so it's going to be about from here to here, and that's my stretched out apple. Now, here's the deal. Every second of every day, the lighting changes. So if my shadow looks like this 1 minute, it's going to change the next minute. So everyone that's around you, their light source might be coming from here or up here. So their shadows are all going to look different from your shadow. Now, there's other parts to an apple, right? You might want to include a little stem up here. You might want to have a little leaf up there. So you could also put those things here that would be included in the shadow, and we'll have a more realistic shadow that way. So that's just a little outline of the shadow to remind myself that I don't want to forget the cast shadow. And I'm going to write that here because those are words that I want you to remember. Now, if the light source is hitting here, where's the brightest spot going to be? Real close to the light source. So over here, I can put a little light reminder for where my light's going to hit. And we call that, does anybody know? That is, well, it has lots of names. I'm going to call it the highlight because that is the brightest spot on the whole apple. It's the only thing that's going to be white. And then sometimes it's called a glare. Then I like to put little reminder lines because this is not a flat apple, right? Apples are round. They've got a big curve. The whole thing's round. And we're trying to make this look like it's round, even though it's on a flat piece of paper. So the best way to do that is to remember to put a curvy line that shows the roundness of the apple. And all of our shadows are going to go from darkest dark on this far side all the way to lightest light. And I like to right in the middle, this is about where your middle gray goes, and you have to remember to curve your shadows as you're shading the apple. So we'll start over here on the darkest. We're going to get it as dark as we can on this side. And it's going to be super, super dark. And I'm going to curve. And sometimes to get a smooth shade on this area, you might want to do little circles. This is the darkest dark. And then we're going to let it slowly start to lighten as we get toward the middle gray. But notice how it just continues to be curved. And we're going to show a value scale from dark, the darkest black, all the way to the lightest light. So it's rolling around, rolling around, rolling around. Value scale is very important. You have to show all the steps. So I like to do little circles. Not everybody does little circles. Now right about here, see how it's gotten real? It's dark through here, but it's going to the middle gray here. Because my apple is not white. My apple is a color. And in order to show it in black and white, I have to have values. So here's my middle gray. Now if I stop here, this is all white. And that just shows the middle, the darker values, right? So we got to continue going. It gets harder as you go up. It's a little harder, and that's why the little circles are helpful. Circles to get nice and smooth. Now once you get all the way up here, sometimes you can do smudging, but I encourage students to learn how to put all of your value on there, and then it's supposed to get so light it just completely fades to white. Well, I need to lighten it. Sometimes you need to lighten a little bit with your eraser, and you can blend it and it just fades to white. And then another thing, you can kind of smooth it after the fact, and it might look even better. Now, right here, it's going to get a little darker because it curves back. So you might have maybe a middle gray because it's curving back where a little bit more shadow falls. So already it's starting to look like a very three-dimensional little apple. But we haven't addressed everything, right? We still have to remember this big shadow down here. I'm going to smooth this out a little bit more. And drawing is just a series of corrections. So you go back and you look at it and you think, I could adjust that a little bit, make that be a smoother transition, and just adjust, adjust, adjust. Now, on your shadow, on your stem, you can't just leave that white or outlined. You have to have a value scale on that too. So the lightest side is from this side, so it's going to be darker on this side. And even though it's little tiny, we're still going to make it get lighter. And maybe the top of it is totally white because the top of the stem is like a little cylinder. And then on this leaf, close down dark in here, it's going to get real dark because no light. Thank you, announcements. So we'll add a little bit of shadow on this side, and notice how I'm getting dark because no light can get in there. And then it's going to start to fade and get light because the light can reach it at the top. You might have a highlight on there, you might not. It just depends how shiny that leaf is, and maybe there's a little lines in the leaf. And then you also have to think about the cast shadow underneath the leaf and the stem. So down in here, it's going to be a deep little spot where that stem is going in there, and then you're going to have a little cast shadow because the stem has a shadow behind it. And you might have a little bit of shadow here where it's underneath that leaf. The cast shadow itself, you have to include the value scale because it's real close in here, so no light can get down here. But the further a shadow gets away from you, the lighter it's going to get until it fades into the top here. So we'll start real close, and it's going to be as dark as we can get it. Now, we're calling it black, but this is not really black. It's as black as a pencil can get. And then I'm going to let it, since it's on a flat surface, I'm just going to let it be smooth. But if this was on an apple that had fallen in the grass, I would have grass texture inside of here. We'll talk more about texture later, but we're just going to let it fade and slowly go from the darkest black till about dark gray or middle gray, depending on how far away your shadow gets from your apple. My shadow is going pretty far because I had my light source a little bit lower. So it's going to fade to probably middle gray, which middle gray is right in there in the middle, right? We have to have our full value scale. And it's going to fade into the shape of the apple. And now we have a very lovely three-dimensional apple. Any little moments that you need to go back and adjust and tweak things, you might decide the shape of your shadow looks weird. You might decide that it needs to get darker in a spot, but adjusting and slowly making this better and better is always the goal. High quality. So there's that little line right there. I can fix it. And if you are really advanced, you can go back in and do what's known as a low light, where the reflection off the surface will actually get a little highlight right next to it. And you go back in and you add that little highlight in there. And then you have to bring, I took off a little bit too much. I can bring that dark back in there. It's a much more sophisticated way to shade. It's just that reflection off the surface. Like if you have a shiny table that it's sitting on, sometimes it'll have a low light, and you can really observe that and get really good. So if you need to, go back and watch this again and practice again, because this is a muscle, just like anything else. The more that you practice, the better that you get.